The reign of the pharaohs spanned millennia, during which Egypt flourished as one of the most powerful and advanced civilizations in the ancient world. The pharaohs, with their divine right to rule, were the very heart of Egypt's political, religious, and cultural identity. However, as with all great empires, the era of the pharaohs eventually came to an end. The decline of Egypt's power, the changing tides of history, and the rise of foreign invaders marked the final chapter of the pharaohs' reign. Yet even in their fall, the legacy of the pharaohs would continue to resonate through history, the decline of Egyptian power. By the end of the New Kingdom, Egypt had begun to face significant internal and external challenges. Political instability, weak leadership, and economic decline slowly eroded the strength of the Egyptian state. The pharaohs were no longer able to maintain the same level of control over Egypt's vast territories, and the once unified kingdom began to fracture. The power of the pharaohs diminished as local rulers, military leaders, and even the priesthood began to assert more control over various regions of Egypt. The once great centralized bureaucracy that had supported the pharaohs began to break down, and Egypt's once indomitable military forces were weakened by internal strife and external threats. The rise of foreign powers, including the Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, and Persians, further contributed to Egypt's decline. Each new wave of invaders presented a challenge to the pharaoh's authority, and the kingdom's weakening borders became more difficult to defend. The pharaohs were increasingly unable to maintain the military dominance and economic strength that had once defined Egypt. The once great monuments that stood as symbols of Egypt's grandeur were left in ruin, a testament to the fall of the mighty empire. The Assyrian, Persian, and Macedonian invasions, as Egypt weakened, it became more vulnerable to foreign conquest. The Assyrians were among the first to invade Egypt, and their military campaigns in the 7th century BCE forced the pharaohs to relinquish control of parts of Egypt. The pharaohs' inability to defend their kingdom marked the beginning of a series of invasions by foreign powers. In the 6th century BCE, the Persian Empire under King Cambyses II successfully invaded Egypt and incorporated it into their vast empire. The Persian invasion effectively ended the rule of the pharaohs, as Egypt became a province under Persian control. Despite brief periods of independence, Egypt was largely under foreign rule for the next several centuries. The final blow came in 332 BCE, when Alexander the Great, the Macedonian king, conquered Egypt as part of his campaign to create a vast empire stretching from Greece to India. With his conquest of Egypt, the era of the pharaohs officially came to an end. After Alexander's death, Egypt fell under the control of his general Ptolemy, who founded the Ptolemaic dynasty. The Ptolemies, though they ruled Egypt for centuries, were Greek and not native Egyptians. The Ptolemaic period marked the end of native Egyptian rule and the pharaoh's long reign over the land. The last pharaoh, Cleopatra VII. The last of the pharaohs was Cleopatra VII, the famous queen who ruled Egypt from 51 BCE until her death in 30 BCE. Cleopatra was a descendant of Ptolemy, one of Alexander's generals, and while she was not a native Egyptian, she embraced Egypt's culture and sought to restore its former glory. Cleopatra became famous for her political acumen, her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and her efforts to maintain Egypt's independence amid growing Roman power. Despite her intelligence and diplomatic skill, Cleopatra was ultimately unable to prevent the fall of Egypt to Rome. In 30 BCE, after a series of defeats and the suicides of both Cleopatra and Mark Antony, Egypt was annexed by the Roman Empire. With this annexation, The era of the pharaohs officially came to an end, and Egypt became a province of Rome. The legacy of the pharaohs, although the reign of the pharaohs came to an end with Cleopatra's death and the Roman conquest, the legacy of the pharaohs endured long after their fall. The monuments, pyramids, and temples built by the pharaohs continued to stand as lasting reminders of their grandeur and divine rule. The image of the pharaoh with their crowns, scepters, and symbols of power would remain deeply ingrained in the cultural consciousness of Egypt and the world. The pharaohs' contributions to art, architecture, and religion have continued to shape the world for thousands of years. Their grandiose monuments, like the Great Pyramid of Giza and the temples at Karnak, remain as symbols of human achievement and ingenuity. Egyptian art, literature, and religious practices have influenced countless cultures throughout history, from the ancient Greeks and Romans to modern Western civilization. The pharaohs' role as gods on earth has also left a lasting legacy. Their divine status and their role in maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order, became an enduring symbol of divine kingship. The pharaoh's concept of the ruler, as both a political and spiritual figure, would influence the development of monarchies and divine right rule in other cultures, including the concept of the divine kingship of European monarchs. The enduring fascination with the pharaohs, the legacy of the pharaohs, continues to captivate the world today. From the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 to the ongoing excavation of temples and tombs throughout Egypt, the world has remained fascinated by the lives of the pharaohs. Archaeologists, historians, and tourists alike continue to study and visit the monuments left behind by these ancient rulers. The pyramids, the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, and the ruins of temples still draw millions of visitors each year, ensuring that the pharaoh's legacy remains alive in the modern world. Through their art, their monuments, and their religious practices, the pharaohs of Egypt have left an indelible mark on human history. Though their reigns ended over 2,000 years ago, the memory of their rule continues to shape our understanding of ancient civilization and the divine nature of kingship. The pharaohs, as rulers of both the earthly and the divine, remain some of the most iconic and enduring figures in history. The final journey of the pharaoh was one of immense significance, not just to the pharaoh but to the entire kingdom. The construction of the pharaoh's tomb, the preparations for their burial, and the rituals surrounding their death were all deeply intertwined with the pharaoh's divine status. The Egyptians believed that death was not an end, but a transformation, and the pharaoh's tomb was designed to ensure their continued existence in the afterlife, where they would join the gods and continue their role as the divine ruler. As the living God on earth, the pharaoh's death marked the transition from their earthly reign to their eternal rule in the afterlife. But the pharaoh's afterlife was not one of passive existence. It was a continuation of their divine duty to uphold Ma'at, the cosmic order. Their tomb, along with the treasures and rituals associated with it, was a means of preserving their power, ensuring their immortality, and securing their place among the gods for all eternity. The construction of the pharaoh's tomb, was the ultimate monument to their power, wealth, and divine right to rule. Throughout Egyptian history, the pharaoh's tomb evolved in both scale and design, with the most famous examples being the massive pyramids of the Old Kingdom. The construction of these tombs was a monumental undertaking, requiring vast amounts of labor and resources. The construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza, built for Pharaoh Khufu, required thousands of workers and took decades to complete. It is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world and remains an enduring symbol of Egypt's architectural and engineering genius. While the pyramids are the most iconic, tombs were constructed in a variety of forms depending on the time period and the pharaoh's preferences. The early pharaohs were buried in mastabas, flat-roofed structures, but by the 4th dynasty, they began constructing step pyramids and eventually the true pyramids. These tombs were not just places of burial, but were designed to provide everything the pharaoh would need in the afterlife. They were filled with treasures, food, statues, and even servants who would accompany the pharaoh to the afterlife. The tombs were designed to protect the pharaoh's body and soul, ensuring that they could continue their divine mission in the next world. In the New Kingdom, particularly in the Valley of the Kings, the pharaohs were buried in rock-cut tombs. These tombs, though not as grand in size as the pyramids, were intricately decorated with scenes from the pharaoh's life and afterlife. The walls of the tombs were covered in elaborate paintings and inscriptions that depicted the pharaoh's journey through the underworld, his judgment before Osiris, and his eventual resurrection. The goal was to ensure that the pharaoh's soul would be protected and that they would pass through the trials of the afterlife successfully. The tomb as a gateway to the afterlife for the pharaoh, the tomb was not just a final resting place, it was a gateway to the afterlife, a place where they would be reborn as a god. The tomb was filled with items necessary for the pharaoh's journey through the underworld. These included food, drink, jewelry, and weapons, all intended to sustain the pharaoh in the afterlife. The most important items placed in the tomb were the spells and prayers that would guide the pharaoh through the various stages of the afterlife. The pyramid texts, the oldest religious texts in Egypt, were inscribed on the walls of the pyramids and were designed to assist the pharaoh in navigating the afterlife. These texts included spells and incantations that helped the pharaoh avoid the dangers of the underworld, defeat hostile gods and creatures, and ultimately join the gods in the afterlife. Later, the Book of the Dead replaced the pyramid texts and was used in the tombs of the New Kingdom. This book was a guide for the deceased, offering detailed instructions on how to pass through the judgment of Osiris and enter the afterlife. One of the most important rituals in the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife was the opening of the mouth ceremony, which was performed both during their lifetime and after their death. This ritual was believed to restore the pharaoh's senses, allowing them to speak, eat, and breathe in the afterlife. It symbolized the pharaoh's resurrection, enabling them to continue their duties as ruler in the divine realm. Treasures and offerings, the treasures buried with the pharaoh, were a reflection of their wealth and divine status. These treasures were not meant to be enjoyed in the afterlife, but instead, they were offerings to the gods to ensure the pharaoh's successful passage into eternity. Gold, silver, precious stones, and intricately crafted furniture were placed in the tomb, along with weapons, clothing, and food. One of the most famous examples of Pharaoh's burial treasures is the tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered by Howard Carter in 1922. The tomb contained thousands of items, including a golden mask, chariots, weapons, and intricate jewelry. While King Tut's tomb was relatively modest compared to other royal tombs, the sheer wealth and craftsmanship of the items found within have made it one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in history. The treasures were meant to honor Tutankhamun's memory and ensure that he would have everything he needed in the afterlife. In addition to physical treasures, the pharaoh's tomb also contained statues and representations of servants who would attend to the pharaoh in the afterlife. These statues, often referred to as shabtis, were placed in the tomb to serve the pharaoh in the afterlife, ensuring that the pharaoh would not lack for anything once they passed into the divine realm. The pharaoh's legacy in the afterlife, even in death, the pharaoh's influence did not end. Their tomb and the rituals surrounding it were designed to ensure their immortality and continued power. The pharaoh's soul was believed to live on in the afterlife, where they would join the gods, particularly Osiris, and continue to rule over Egypt from the divine realm. The pharaoh's legacy was eternal, and the tomb was a monument to this immortality. In many ways, the tombs of the pharaohs were not just places of burial, but lasting symbols of their divine authority. The grand tombs and pyramids were meant to ensure that the pharaoh's memory would endure forever, serving as a reminder to future generations of the pharaoh's power, divinity, and place in the cosmos. For the people of Egypt, these monumental tombs were more than just the resting places of their rulers. They were the physical manifestations of the pharaoh's eternal role in maintaining Ma'at, the divine order of the universe. The pharaoh's tomb, with its treasures, texts, and rituals, ensured that their power and influence lived on long after their death. It was not simply a final resting place. It was the portal through which the pharaoh would ascend to the divine, where they would continue to rule eternally in the afterlife. The pharaoh's role as the supreme military leader of Egypt was one of the most critical aspects of their reign. While Egypt was known for its wealth, culture, and religious importance, it was also a kingdom constantly in need of defending its borders and securing its place in the ancient world. The pharaoh's military campaigns were not only a means of protecting Egypt from external threats, but also a way to project power, expand territories, and maintain their status as the divine ruler of Egypt. Military victories were seen as an affirmation of the pharaoh's divine right to rule, and failure in battle could result in the loss of prestige, influence, and sometimes even their life. Defending Egypt's borders, the pharaoh's first and most important military task was defending Egypt's borders. Egypt was located at the crossroads of several ancient civilizations, including the Hittites to the north, the Nubians to the south, the Libyans to the west, and various Asiatic peoples to the east. These neighboring peoples often posed threats to Egypt's stability, and the pharaoh's armies had to be vigilant in maintaining control over Egypt's borders. The Nile River, while providing immense benefits, also presented challenges for the pharaoh's military. While it was a natural barrier that protected Egypt's interior from foreign invasions, the Nile also provided a route for foreign armies to invade through the delta or the narrow strips of land along the riverbanks. To defend against these threats, pharaohs maintained powerful standing armies. The Egyptian military was well organized, with divisions of infantry, archers, chariotry, and cavalry. The chariot in particular became a symbol of Egyptian military might. Chariots, pulled by horses, were used as mobile platforms for archers and were critical in battle. Pharaohs like Ramses II are often depicted in battle scenes, riding chariots and leading their soldiers into the fray. These military campaigns were essential in ensuring Egypt's defense and maintaining its sovereignty. Pharaohs also had to deal with specific threats from powerful external forces, such as the invasions of the Sea Peoples, a group of maritime raiders who threatened the eastern Mediterranean. The pharaohs, particularly Ramses III, fought back against these invaders and preserved Egypt's coastal territories. Ramses III's victory in the Battle of the Delta was crucial in safeguarding Egypt from the Sea Peoples, ensuring that Egypt's access to trade routes remained intact. The role of the pharaoh in military campaigns. While the pharaoh was expected to lead Egypt's military in battle, they often did not directly command every skirmish or fight. In many cases, pharaohs appointed trusted generals to lead military campaigns, while they focused on broader strategy, planning, and religious rituals. However, the pharaoh was always the ultimate commander-in-chief, and their participation in key battles was seen as a sign of divine favor. The pharaoh's direct involvement in military campaigns was a crucial part of their role as the protector of Egypt, demonstrating to the people that they were personally invested in the safety and success of the kingdom. One of the most famous military leaders in Egyptian history, Ramses II, demonstrated this aspect of leadership. Known for his military prowess and strategic thinking, Ramses II led numerous campaigns, including his famous battle at Kadesh against the Hittites. This battle, fought early in his reign, was one of the largest chariot battles in history. Though the battle ended in a stalemate, Ramses II famously portrayed himself as the victor in his inscriptions, portraying his strength and divine right to rule. Ramses was not only a military leader, but a propaganda machine, using the battlefield as a stage to promote his godlike status to both his people and his enemies. Despite some losses or inconclusive battles, Ramses II's reign is remembered for the way he utilized military triumphs, regardless of their actual outcome, to solidify his image as an undefeatable leader chosen by the gods. This example reflects the importance of perception in Egypt's military endeavors, where victories were more than just strategic wins. They were acts of divine will that reinforced the pharaoh's authority. Conquest and expansion. While the defense of Egypt was the primary military focus, many pharaohs also sought to expand Egypt's borders. Expansion into foreign territories was not only a matter of acquiring land and wealth, it was a demonstration of the pharaoh's divine right to control the earth. Military campaigns were often justified by the pharaoh's need to subdue foreign threats, protect trade routes, or maintain Egypt's supremacy over neighboring regions. During the New Kingdom, circa 1550–1070 BCE, Egypt reached the height of its territorial expansion. Pharaohs like Thutmose III, Amenhotep II, and Ramses II launched campaigns that extended Egypt's control over regions such as Nubia, the Levant, and parts of modern-day Syria. These campaigns were often designed to secure Egypt's borders and access to resources, but they were also driven by Egypt's ambition to become a dominant superpower in the ancient world. Thutmose III, often referred to as the Napoleon of Egypt, led numerous military campaigns that expanded Egypt's influence throughout the Near East. His successful military strategies in regions like Syria and Canaan earned him a reputation as one of Egypt's greatest military pharaohs. By securing these regions, Thutmose III not only acquired vast resources and wealth, but also cemented Egypt's place as a leading power in the ancient world. His success was also due to his ability to coordinate large military campaigns, employing tactics that allowed Egypt to overcome its enemies and expand its empire. Ramses II, during his reign, also sought to extend Egypt's dominance. His military campaigns in Syria and the Levant were designed to maintain Egypt's hold over key territories and protect the kingdom's trade routes. The Treaty of Kadesh, signed after the Battle of Kadesh with the Hittites, marked a significant diplomatic victory for Ramses II, though it also signified the end of Egypt's expansionist military campaigns in the region. This treaty, which ended years of conflict, is considered one of the first peace treaties in recorded history and demonstrates how military action could be followed by diplomatic resolution. Internal revolts and military challenges. Despite their military might, pharaohs were also confronted with internal challenges. Rebellions from within Egypt, whether sparked by the abuse of power, economic instability, or military dissatisfaction, were constant threats. The pharaoh had to maintain control over the various regions of Egypt and ensure that military leaders remained loyal. Sometimes rebellious military leaders or governors attempted to seize power or challenge the pharaoh's authority, leading to civil unrest or even open conflict within the royal family. In these situations, the pharaoh's military leadership was tested at home as much as abroad. Pharaohs like Ramses III faced conspiracies within their courts, leading to the harem conspiracy, where the queen and her son conspired to assassinate the pharaoh and seize the throne. Despite such threats, Ramses III managed to defend his kingdom from both external and internal threats, although his death eventually led to a weakening of Egypt's military and political stability. The pharaoh's propaganda and military. Military victories in Egypt were not just about winning battles, they were tools of political propaganda. The pharaohs understood that their image and divine authority depended on their military success. After a successful campaign, pharaohs would commission monuments, inscriptions, and reliefs to commemorate their victories. These artifacts, often displayed in temples and tombs, portrayed the pharaoh as the protector of Egypt, chosen by the gods to defend the land from its enemies. These military depictions were not always accurate. Often the pharaohs exaggerated their victories to demonstrate their invincibility and divine favor. They would depict themselves as towering figures, striking down their enemies with divine power. The imagery of the pharaoh's military triumphs, whether true or embellished, reinforced their image as the god-king and solidified their control over the kingdom. The pharaoh's reign was not only marked by political, military, and economic responsibilities, but was also intricately tied to their sacred role as the divine ruler of Egypt. The pharaoh was considered a living god, an earthly incarnation of Horus, the god of kingship and the sky. This divine connection was central to their legitimacy as rulers and played a defining role in their daily life, governance, and legacy. In ancient Egypt, a pharaoh's authority and power were not just temporal, they were divinely ordained and inseparable from the god's will. The pharaoh's connection to the divine was cemented from the moment of their birth. It was believed that a pharaoh was chosen by the gods to rule, and they were directly descended from the gods themselves. The pharaoh was considered the living Horus, and after their death, they would ascend to become Osiris, the god of the afterlife. This divine cycle of life, death, and rebirth reinforced the pharaoh's sacred status and connected them to the eternal order of the cosmos. The pharaoh's divine authority. The divine nature of the pharaoh's authority meant that their rule was considered both a political and spiritual mandate. The pharaoh was responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order, which included everything from justice and harmony to the balance between the gods and the earth. Ma'at was the principle that governed both the universe and Egyptian society, and it was the pharaoh's sacred duty to uphold it. Any disruption to Ma'at was seen as a threat to the natural order, and the pharaoh's failure to maintain Ma'at could have dire consequences, such as famine, disease, or rebellion. Therefore, the pharaoh was not just a ruler in the earthly sense, but a divine figure whose actions were seen as directly impacting the fate of Egypt and its people. The pharaoh's power was also validated by their role as the high priest of every temple in Egypt. While there were many priests in the kingdom, the pharaoh was considered the chief priest who had the sole authority to act on behalf of the gods. Every major decision, from military campaigns to religious reforms, was made with divine consultation. The pharaoh's relationship with the gods was thought to be the foundation of their rule, and their decisions were believed to be guided by divine wisdom. Whether it was conducting a ritual at the temple, offering sacrifices, or making legal pronouncements, the pharaoh's authority was inseparable from their connection to the gods. The daily rituals of divine service. The pharaoh's daily life was steeped in religious duties, and their role as the divine ruler required constant engagement with the gods. The morning ritual was an essential part of the pharaoh's routine. Every day began with a visit to the temple, where the pharaoh would offer prayers and sacrifices to the gods. This ritual was a reaffirmation of the pharaoh's divine status and a way to ensure that the gods were pleased with their reign. The pharaoh's personal relationship with the gods was also reinforced through the maintenance of temples and the performance of religious ceremonies. The pharaoh was expected to oversee major religious festivals, ceremonies, and holidays, all of which played a role in solidifying their connection to the divine and reinforcing their role as Egypt's spiritual leader. The most important religious rituals conducted by the pharaoh were the daily offerings to the gods. These offerings were not only meant to appease the gods, but also to ensure the fertility of the land, the prosperity of Egypt, and the safety of the pharaoh and their people. Rituals included the offering of food, incense, and other precious items. The pharaoh was also required to perform the opening of the mouth ceremony, which was part of their funerary practices, but was also performed during their lifetime to ensure their continued connection with the gods. This ceremony symbolized the pharaoh's divine resurrection, ensuring that they could continue their role as the intermediary between gods and people. The role of the gods in the pharaoh's life. Egypt's pantheon of gods and goddesses was vast, and each deity played a role in maintaining Egypt's cosmic order. While the pharaoh was considered a divine figure, they were still deeply reliant on the god's favor to succeed. The most important deities in the pharaoh's life were Amun-Ra, the sun god and king of the gods, and Horus, the god of kingship. However, the pharaoh was expected to have a personal relationship with various gods depending on their reign and the political needs of the time. For example, Ramses II, known as Ramses the Great, was a staunch follower of Amun-Ra, and much of his reign was marked by the construction of temples dedicated to this god. Ramses's divine status was reinforced by his devotion to Amun-Ra, and it was believed that the god's favor was essential for Egypt's success during his reign. Similarly, Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh, sought to elevate Aten, the sun disk, god above all other deities. This shift in religious practice marked a major departure from Egypt's traditional polytheistic beliefs and caused widespread turmoil. Akhenaten's failure to maintain favor with the gods was one of the reasons his reign ended in failure. The pharaoh's relationship with the gods was also reflected in their funerary practices. After death, the pharaoh was believed to become Osiris, the god of the afterlife, and their soul was thought to live on forever. To ensure a safe journey to the afterlife, elaborate tombs were constructed, and burial rites were meticulously followed. The pharaoh's tomb was filled with offerings meant to ensure that their soul could thrive in the afterlife and continue to maintain order in the universe. The pharaoh's succession, passing down divine rule. A crucial part of the pharaoh's divine role was the succession to the throne. The pharaoh's heirs were not just political successors, but also divine representatives who would continue the work of maintaining Ma'at and ensuring that Egypt remained in favor with the gods. The pharaoh's children, particularly their sons, were groomed from a young age to take on the responsibilities of ruling Egypt. The pharaoh's ability to pass on the divine mandate to a worthy successor was essential to ensuring the continuity of Egypt's power and prosperity. The process of succession was often marked by royal ceremonies and rituals. The pharaoh would designate an heir, typically the eldest son from the great wife, who would be formally recognized as the next pharaoh. However, succession was not always peaceful, and rivalries between royal family members could create turmoil within the court. This often led to power struggles, as different factions of the royal family sought to secure the throne for their preferred candidate. Despite the challenges, the pharaoh's role as the living god ensured that the throne remained sacred and was passed down in accordance with divine will, the pharaoh's death and immortality. The final act of the pharaoh's divine journey was their death, which was seen as a transition to the afterlife. In death, the pharaoh was believed to join the gods and assume their place among them in the heavens. Their soul would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at to determine their fate, and if they were found worthy, they would live eternally as a god. The pharaoh's death marked the end of their reign, but also the beginning of their eternal, divine rule in the afterlife. The tombs, monuments, and rituals associated with the pharaoh's death were all part of ensuring their immortality and their continued role in maintaining the cosmic order. The pharaoh was not only the supreme religious and military leader of Egypt, but they were also the steward of its economy. As Egypt's central authority, the pharaoh held ultimate responsibility for managing the kingdom's resources, ensuring its prosperity, and maintaining the flow of wealth that supported their rule. The economy of ancient Egypt was deeply intertwined with agriculture, trade, and the pharaoh's ability to control resources. The pharaoh's success in managing Egypt's economy determined not only their personal wealth and the stability of their reign, but also the survival of the entire kingdom. Agriculture, the heart of Egypt's economy. At the core of Egypt's economy was agriculture, fueled by the annual flooding of the Nile River. The Nile was the lifeblood of Egypt, providing water for irrigation, fertile soil for crops, and a reliable transportation route. The pharaoh was tasked with overseeing the agricultural system to ensure that the land was properly cultivated and that Egypt's people had enough food to sustain themselves. Egypt's economy was based primarily on the production of staple crops such as wheat, barley, and flax, along with fruits, vegetables, and livestock. The pharaoh would organize large-scale irrigation projects to control the flow of water from the Nile, ensuring that the floodwaters reached the fields and enriched the soil. The pharaoh also played a key role in managing the distribution of agricultural produce, ensuring that surplus crops were stored for use during times of drought or famine. In times of crisis, the pharaoh could step in to redistribute food and alleviate suffering. The management of these agricultural resources was one of the pharaoh's most important tasks, as it directly affected the welfare of the population and the kingdom's overall stability. Trade, Egypt's connections to the world. The pharaoh's economic stewardship also extended to trade. Egypt's location, with access to both the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea, allowed it to serve as a central hub for trade between Africa, Asia, and Europe. The pharaoh had to ensure that Egypt's trading routes remained open, safe, and profitable. Trade was essential for obtaining luxury goods, raw materials, and other resources that Egypt could not produce on its own. Egypt imported timber, copper, lapis lazuli, and other valuable items, while it exported goods such as grain, linen, papyrus, and gold. Trade expeditions were often organized by the pharaoh, and they involved long-distance journeys to foreign lands. One of the most famous trade missions during the New Kingdom was Queen Hatshepsut's expedition to Punt, a region believed to be located in the Horn of Africa or southern Arabia. The pharaoh would send large caravans or ships to acquire precious goods, including incense, myrrh, and exotic animals. These expeditions not only provided economic wealth, but also enhanced the pharaoh's prestige, as they were seen as proof of their ability to maintain Egypt's influence and prosperity. The pharaoh's role in trade was not just about wealth accumulation. It was also about securing Egypt's political and military interests. Trade was often used as a diplomatic tool, forging alliances and strengthening ties with neighboring kingdoms. Through trade agreements and alliances, The pharaoh could ensure Egypt's access to critical resources and maintain a stable flow of goods and wealth. As such, the pharaoh's role as a merchant and diplomat was crucial in maintaining the economic health of Egypt. Labor and the workforce. The pyramid of power. The pharaoh's economy was also shaped by the labor force. Labor was required for various projects from agriculture and construction to military campaigns and trade. The pharaoh had to manage a large and diverse workforce, which consisted of both free laborers and slaves. While much of the labor force consisted of peasants who worked the land, there were also skilled artisans, craftsmen, and laborers who were employed for the construction of monumental buildings, tombs, temples, and pyramids. The construction of Egypt's iconic pyramids was one of the most labor-intensive undertakings in the ancient world. The pharaoh was responsible for organizing the workforce, ensuring that materials were available, and overseeing the massive construction projects. While popular myth suggests that slaves built the pyramids, historical evidence shows that most of the laborers were skilled workers who were employed on a seasonal basis. These workers, many of whom came from rural villages, were housed in temporary worker camps and provided with food, shelter, and wages in return for their labor. The pharaoh also relied on a network of craftsmen and artisans to create the monumental statues, paintings, and carvings that adorned temples and tombs. These workers were highly skilled and enjoyed a degree of prestige, as their work was integral to maintaining the pharaoh's image and ensuring their divine authority. The pharaoh's involvement in these projects was central, as they often commissioned art and architectural works to commemorate their achievements and reinforce their divine status. Taxation, the backbone of royal revenue, a crucial component of the pharaoh's economic system was taxation. Egypt's wealth was built on the productivity of its people, and the pharaoh had to ensure that taxes were collected to fund the kingdom's various needs. Taxes were levied on agricultural produce, trade, and even on the labor force. The pharaoh's ability to manage taxes effectively was essential for maintaining Egypt's infrastructure, funding military campaigns, and supporting religious institutions. Scribes played a key role in the administration of taxes. They recorded the amount of goods and resources produced by farmers, merchants, and laborers, and ensured that the appropriate tax was collected. The pharaoh's taxation system was designed to be fair but also efficient, ensuring that the state received enough revenue to function. The money collected through taxes would go toward the upkeep of temples, the construction of monuments, and the funding of military expeditions. It also helped maintain the pharaoh's court and the lifestyles of the royal family and their officials. The pharaoh could also use taxes to reward loyal officials and military leaders, distributing wealth and resources to those who served the state. This system ensured that the pharaoh maintained the loyalty of his key supporters, and that Egypt's elite remained committed to upholding royal authority. Economic challenges and the pharaoh's responsibility. Despite the pharaoh's economic stewardship, the Kingdom of Egypt was not immune to economic challenges. Natural disasters such as droughts or locust infestations could devastate crops, leading to famine and social unrest. The pharaoh was responsible for managing such crises, organizing food redistribution, and ensuring that the population was supported. If the pharaoh failed to provide relief, their authority could be called into question, and rebellion or unrest could ensue. Economic stability was also threatened by external factors. During periods of military conflict, Egypt's resources could be drained, and trade routes could be disrupted. The pharaoh had to be vigilant in securing Egypt's borders, ensuring that both the kingdom's wealth and its people were protected from foreign invaders. Legacy and the pharaoh's wealth. The pharaoh's wealth was seen as a reflection of their divine favor and ability to govern effectively. The prosperity of Egypt, whether through its agricultural abundance, successful trade expeditions, or monumental constructions, was directly linked to the pharaoh's ability to maintain control over the economy. The pharaoh's wealth was also immortalized through the monuments, tombs, and treasures that were left behind after their death. The wealth of the pharaohs was intended to ensure their passage to the afterlife, with tombs filled with treasures that would accompany them into eternity. In the end, the pharaoh's economic role was one of balance, ensuring Egypt's prosperity while managing its resources, controlling trade, and maintaining order. A wise and prosperous pharaoh was remembered for their economic acumen, while a weak or ineffective ruler faced potential disaster. The pharaoh's ability to manage Egypt's economy determined the stability of their reign and the lasting legacy they left for future generations. The pharaoh's court was a place of power, influence, and intrigue, where politics, religion, and social dynamics intersected. The pharaoh, as the ultimate ruler, maintained control over the kingdom, but the court itself was a critical hub for the day-to-day administration of Egypt. It was in this space that the pharaoh's authority was reaffirmed and extended, where decisions affecting the kingdom were made, and where the pharaoh's image was carefully crafted and protected. While the pharaoh's life was one of divine importance and grandiose rituals, the royal court was often filled with complex social dynamics, rivalries, and political maneuvering. The court was made up of a wide variety of individuals, each with their own roles, from the highest-ranking viziers and military leaders to the most trusted priests and members of the royal family. Despite the pharaoh's ultimate power, the success of their reign often depended on their ability to navigate the complex relationships that existed within their court. The role of the viziers and officials at the head of the pharaoh's administrative hierarchy were the viziers, the highest-ranking officials who managed the kingdom's daily affairs. The vizier was the pharaoh's right-hand man, responsible for overseeing everything from legal matters to taxation and even military campaigns. The position of vizier was one of great prestige, but also fraught with challenges, as it was the vizier's job to ensure that the pharaoh's will was carried out across the vast territories of Egypt. The pharaoh needed a competent and loyal vizier to ensure the smooth functioning of the empire. The viziers were supported by a wide range of lower-ranking officials, such as scribes, tax collectors, and military commanders. These individuals, while not necessarily part of the royal family, wielded significant influence within the court and often acted as the pharaoh's eyes and ears in the provinces. The bureaucracy of Egypt was immense, and the pharaoh had to trust these officials to implement policies effectively. However, this system also created opportunities for corruption and abuse of power, and some pharaohs had to deal with internal conspiracies or even uprisings orchestrated by discontented officials. Royal family rivalries and politics. The royal family was, without question, a critical component of the pharaoh's court. The pharaoh's wives, children, siblings, and extended relatives all held positions of power and influence. However, being part of the royal family did not guarantee peace or cooperation. In fact, the royal court was often a hotbed of intrigue, with family members constantly vying for power, favor, and influence over the pharaoh. Succession to the throne was never straightforward, and rivalries between brothers, sisters, or even between the pharaoh and their own children were common. The pharaoh typically had many wives and concubines, each hoping to bear the pharaoh's heir. The competition for favor in the royal court was fierce, and those who held the pharaoh's ear could wield tremendous power. The most powerful of these wives was often designated as the Great Wife, and her son, if one was born, would typically be the heir to the throne. However, this did not always guarantee a peaceful transition of power. The children of other wives, or even more distant relatives, could challenge the designated heir and create political turmoil. One of the most famous and tragic examples of royal family intrigue comes from the reign of Akhenaten, the so-called heretic pharaoh. Akhenaten's religious reforms, which focused on worshipping the sun god Aten over Egypt's traditional pantheon, caused great divisions within the royal family and the court. Akhenaten's relationship with his wife, Nefertiti, and his children, particularly his son Tutankhamun, was strained by these changes. After Akhenaten's death, his successor Tutankhamun was forced to restore the traditional gods, but by that point, the royal family had fractured, leading to internal conflict that contributed to the decline of Akhenaten's dynasty. Another example of royal family rivalry occurred during the reign of Ramses III. Ramses III's death was the result of a conspiracy orchestrated by his wife, Ti, and her son, who wanted to seize the throne. Known as the Harem Conspiracy, this event is a dramatic example of how dangerous the internal politics of the royal court could be. Despite his efforts to maintain control, Ramses III ultimately succumbed to the plotting of his own family, revealing the perilous nature of royal rule in ancient Egypt. The influence of the priests' religion and politics were inseparable in Egypt, and the priests held considerable power within the court. The pharaoh's religious role was central to their authority, and maintaining favor with the gods was essential for their rule. To this end, the priests of Egypt were not only spiritual leaders, but also political players. They controlled vast wealth through temple holdings and offerings, and their influence over the people was immense. The priesthood was the only group that had a direct connection to the gods, and as such their opinions and actions could sway public sentiment. The most powerful priesthood in Egypt was that of Amun, based at the Grand Temple of Karnak. The high priests of Amun wielded extraordinary power, often rivaling that of the pharaoh. Over time, the priests of Amun became increasingly influential, and some pharaohs struggled to assert their dominance over them. For example, in the reign of Akhenaten, the pharaoh attempted to diminish the power of the priesthood of Amun by replacing traditional religious practices with his worship of the Aten. This caused a great deal of conflict, as the priesthood of Amun fought to preserve its control over Egypt's religious and political landscape. The priests of Egypt were also responsible for maintaining the temple economies and overseeing the daily rituals that ensured the pharaoh's connection with the gods. They played a critical role in ensuring that Egypt's religious calendar was followed, and they also had a say in which pharaohs were considered to be divinely favored. The priests often used their position to influence political decisions, and in some cases, they even helped shape the succession of pharaohs. Their support was often crucial to a pharaoh's ability to rule effectively, public ceremonies and displaying power. The pharaoh's court was also a place of spectacle, where public ceremonies, festivals, and grand events were staged to demonstrate the pharaoh's power and divine authority. These events were meticulously planned, with the pharaoh often appearing in elaborate costumes and regalia, accompanied by priests, soldiers, and attendants. These ceremonies were not just displays of power, but also strategic tools used to reinforce the pharaoh's legitimacy. By participating in these public events, the pharaoh demonstrated their connection to the gods and reminded the people of their divine mandate to rule. One of the most significant public ceremonies in Egypt was the Opet festival, which was held annually to honor the god Amun and reaffirm the pharaoh's divine rule. During this festival, the pharaoh would travel from the temple of Karnak to the temple of Luxor, accompanied by a grand procession. The pharaoh's participation in such events was a way to cement their relationship with the gods and showcase their ability to maintain Ma'at, the divine order of the universe. Intrigue and power struggles. Despite the grandeur of the pharaoh's court, it was also a place of constant power struggles. The court was filled with ambitious individuals, officials, military leaders, and members of the royal family, each hoping to gain favor with the pharaoh and secure a better position for themselves or their family. These struggles for power were often subtle, but at times they could explode into open conflict, as was seen in the case of the harem conspiracy or the struggles of rival princes for the throne. The pharaoh's ability to navigate these intrigues was vital for the success of their reign. The pharaoh had to maintain a delicate balance, ensuring that they could keep the various factions within their court loyal and aligned with their vision. They had to be savvy diplomats and strong leaders, capable of making tough decisions and managing the egos and ambitions of the people around them. The pharaoh was not just a ruler of Egypt in terms of its culture and economy. They were also its chief military commander. Egypt, while renowned for its achievements in architecture, religion, and art, was also surrounded by powerful and often hostile neighbors. The pharaoh's military prowess was critical for the protection and expansion of Egypt's borders. Throughout history, the pharaohs of Egypt had to defend their kingdom from invading forces, suppress rebellions, and even engage in military conquest to maintain their power. This role as both a divine ruler and a military leader formed the backbone of Egyptian leadership. In the ancient world, a pharaoh's strength in battle directly reflected their divine favor. The Egyptians believed that the pharaoh was chosen by the gods to defend the land and maintain cosmic order, or Ma'at. A pharaoh's military campaigns were therefore not just battles for land or power. They were seen as sacred duties, acts of divine will that proved the pharaoh's strength and their connection to the gods. The pharaohs were expected to lead their armies in battle, sometimes personally leading troops into the fray, and at other times overseeing military campaigns from a strategic command center. Egyptian armies were made up of various divisions, including infantry, chariots, archers, and specialized troops. The pharaoh was the ultimate symbol of military strength, but they relied heavily on skilled generals and commanders to carry out military operations. One of the most iconic figures in Egyptian military history is Ramses II, known as Ramses the Great. Ramses II led Egypt to many military victories, and his reign marked the height of Egyptian military power. His greatest military achievement was the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, fought in the 13th century BCE. Though the battle ended in a stalemate, Ramses portrayed himself as the victor, and the battle was a pivotal moment in Egyptian history. Ramses II not only led the Egyptian army into battle, but also engaged in extensive diplomatic negotiations to secure peace with the Hittites after the conflict. This led to one of the first recorded peace treaties in history, ensuring that Egypt's borders were secure from Hittite aggression. Military expeditions were common during the reigns of many pharaohs. During the New Kingdom, circa 1550–1070 BCE, Egypt expanded its territories significantly. Pharaohs like Thutmose III and Seti I led successful campaigns in the Levant, Nubia, and beyond. These campaigns were not merely territorial expansions. They were often conducted to maintain Egypt's strategic interests, secure trade routes, and ensure access to resources. Pharaohs needed to exert control over vital areas to maintain their power, and military campaigns were a key means of doing so. Thutmose III, sometimes called the Napoleon of Egypt, was an especially successful military leader. His military prowess and tactical genius earned him a reputation as one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs. He led numerous campaigns in the Near East, extending Egypt's borders and securing Egypt's dominance over much of the Levant. His campaigns in the region are seen as critical to Egypt's territorial expansion during the 18th dynasty, and his reign is regarded as one of the most successful in Egypt's history. Thutmose III's military victories ensured Egypt's dominance as a superpower in the ancient world for several centuries. The pharaoh's military role was not only about conquest and expansion, however. As a protector of Egypt, the pharaoh had to defend the kingdom's borders from external threats. The Nile River, which was the lifeblood of Egypt, served as both a natural barrier and an avenue for trade and communication. The pharaoh had to ensure that Egypt's borders remained secure, particularly from the Libyans to the west, the Nubians to the south, and the Hittites and Sea peoples to the north and east. These regions were often in conflict, and the pharaoh's ability to defend Egypt against foreign invaders was paramount to the kingdom's survival. Egypt was often threatened by the Sea peoples, a confederation of maritime groups that wreaked havoc along the eastern Mediterranean coast during the Late Bronze Age. During the reign of Ramses III, the Sea peoples launched a series of invasions against Egypt. Ramses III led Egypt's forces in defense of the kingdom and successfully repelled the invaders, ensuring Egypt's continued dominance in the region. Ramses III's victory against the Sea peoples was one of the defining moments of his reign, and it demonstrated his military strength and strategic ability. Beyond the traditional armies, the pharaoh also had to ensure the loyalty and discipline of the military. The army was often composed of both professional soldiers and conscripts. The conscripts were typically peasants who were drafted into service during times of war. This system allowed the pharaoh to field large armies, but also posed challenges in maintaining the morale and effectiveness of the troops. The pharaoh had to balance the need for a strong military force with the practical realities of governing a vast kingdom with limited resources. The pharaoh's role in warfare also extended to their strategic use of propaganda. After military victories, the pharaohs would commission large monuments and inscriptions to commemorate their victories and display their divine right to rule. The walls of temples, tombs, and monuments were often covered with depictions of the pharaoh leading armies to victory. These images depicted the pharaoh not only as a military leader, but also as a divine protector of Egypt. The visual imagery was designed to reinforce the idea that the pharaoh's victories were granted by the gods and that their rule was sanctioned by divine will. Warfare in ancient Egypt was not just a matter of military tactics, it was also deeply intertwined with religion. The pharaoh's military victories were often framed as acts of divine favor, and they were celebrated as such by the people. The gods, particularly Horus and Amun-Ra, were invoked before battles, and their support was seen as essential to the success of the Egyptian army. The pharaoh, as the earthly manifestation of the gods, had a divine mandate to protect Egypt from its enemies and maintain the order of the universe. However, warfare was not without its costs. The pharaoh's military campaigns were often brutal, and wars of conquest could be costly both in terms of resources and human lives. Egypt's military campaigns were often conducted in harsh desert landscapes, and battles could last for months, draining the kingdom's resources. After major military campaigns, the pharaoh had to manage the consequences, including the repopulation of conquered territories, securing resources for the kingdom and ensuring that Egypt's military power remained strong. In the end, the pharaoh's role in warfare was a reflection of their broader responsibility to Egypt and the gods. They were not just kings, but divine protectors, tasked with defending the kingdom, expanding its borders, and ensuring the prosperity of their people. Their military leadership was vital to Egypt's survival, and their ability to wage successful campaigns ensured that Egypt remained a dominant force in the ancient world. The pharaoh was not only a religious and military leader, but also a shrewd political figure who had to navigate a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and external threats. As the supreme ruler of Egypt, their political role extended far beyond the palace walls. The pharaoh had to manage relations with foreign powers, maintain internal stability, and balance the interests of different groups within Egyptian society. In essence, the pharaoh had to act as a diplomat, a strategist, and a ruler all at once, ensuring Egypt's dominance in the ancient world. The political landscape in ancient Egypt was one of intrigue, diplomacy, and power struggles. Despite their divine status, pharaohs were often confronted with external threats from neighboring kingdoms and internal challenges from ambitious nobles, military leaders, or even family members. The pharaoh's ability to manage these political complexities was one of the key factors in determining their success or failure as a ruler. One of the pharaoh's most significant political roles was as the central figure in Egypt's foreign policy. Egypt, situated between Africa and the Middle East, was surrounded by powerful and often hostile neighbors, including the Hittites, Nubians, Libyans, and later the Sea Peoples. To maintain Egypt's position as a dominant power in the ancient world, the pharaoh had to engage in a delicate balancing act. Military conquest, strategic alliances, and diplomatic treaties were all part of a pharaoh's political toolbox. Pharaohs often employed diplomacy to secure Egypt's borders and ensure its safety. This was particularly evident during the reign of Ramses II, who is famous for his diplomatic efforts, especially in relation to the Hittites. The Battle of Kadesh, fought between the Egyptian forces under Ramses II and the Hittite Empire, ended in a stalemate, but it was followed by one of the earliest known peace treaties in history. This treaty, carved into the walls of the Temple of Karnak, marked a significant political achievement for Ramses II. The peace agreement between Egypt and the Hittites was a testament to the pharaoh's ability to secure Egypt's interests without resorting to further bloodshed. This diplomatic victory not only ensured Egypt's security, but also solidified Ramses II's legacy as a powerful and wise ruler. In addition to peace treaties, pharaohs also formed strategic alliances through marriage. Marriages between royal families were a common diplomatic practice in ancient Egypt, and the pharaoh would often marry the daughters of foreign kings or queens to strengthen ties with other nations. These marriages were not just symbolic, they were a way of ensuring that Egypt had allies in times of conflict. The pharaoh's wives could also serve as important political figures, influencing their husbands' decisions and securing the loyalty of their foreign allies. However, the pharaoh's political influence was not limited to foreign diplomacy. Domestically, the pharaoh was the ultimate authority, managing the intricate bureaucracy that governed Egypt. Egypt's vast bureaucracy was made up of officials, scribes, and governors who helped manage everything from taxation and agriculture to law enforcement and infrastructure. The pharaoh's political acumen was crucial in managing these various aspects of governance. To maintain control over Egypt's vast territory, the pharaoh relied heavily on local governors, military commanders, and priests. These officials were appointed by the pharaoh and were expected to carry out their duties in accordance with the pharaoh's will. However, the pharaoh's control was often challenged by the ambitions of local leaders who sought to increase their own power. To maintain stability, the pharaoh had to carefully balance the interests of these different factions. Some pharaohs employed a policy of divide and rule, using political manipulation to pit rival factions against each other and prevent any single group from becoming too powerful. The pharaoh's political power was also tied to their ability to maintain law and order. As the ultimate judge of the land, the pharaoh was responsible for ensuring that justice was served. The pharaoh had the final say on all matters of law, and their decisions were seen as divinely ordained. The pharaoh's court was the highest authority in Egypt, and they were expected to resolve disputes, levy punishments, and ensure that the laws of Egypt were upheld. Failure to do so could result in a breakdown of social order, and the pharaoh's rule could be challenged. Throughout history, there have been several examples of pharaohs whose political skills were critical to their success. One such pharaoh was Amenhotep III, who ruled during a period of relative peace and prosperity. Amenhotep III was known for his diplomatic efforts, including sending envoys to other nations to establish trade routes and alliances. He formed strong relationships with foreign powers, including the Mitanni, Hittites, and Babylonians, and his reign marked a time of cultural exchange and artistic achievement. However, his political acumen was not enough to prevent the eventual decline of his dynasty, as his successor, Akhenaten, implemented religious reforms that destabilized Egypt's political and religious foundations. Another example of a politically astute pharaoh was Thutmose III, often referred to as the Napoleon of Egypt. Thutmose III was a military genius who expanded Egypt's empire through a series of successful campaigns, but he also understood the importance of maintaining diplomatic relations with neighboring powers. His reign marked the height of Egypt's territorial expansion, and he is credited with consolidating Egypt's dominance in the Near East. Thutmose III's political strategies ensured that Egypt remained a superpower in the ancient world for centuries to come. However, not all pharaohs were successful in their political endeavors. Some pharaohs faced rebellions from within their own ranks, while others struggled to maintain control over Egypt's vast territory. Political instability and corruption within the royal court were often the downfall of many rulers. The most famous example of a failed political leadership is that of Akhenaten, whose radical religious reforms alienated both the priesthood and the military, leading to instability and ultimately his downfall. Akhenaten's decision to abandon Egypt's traditional pantheon of gods in favor of the Aten, the sun god, caused a rift within Egyptian society that would take years to heal. The ability to navigate both internal and external politics was crucial for any pharaoh's survival. A wise and diplomatic pharaoh could secure Egypt's place as a powerful empire, while a weak or ineffective ruler could face rebellion, military defeat, and even assassination. The pharaoh's role as a political leader was not just about wielding power. It was about understanding how to maintain that power through diplomacy, strategy, and the careful management of both allies and enemies. The true power and greatness of a pharaoh were not only found in their life and actions, but also in the legacy they left behind. While death marked the end of their earthly reign, it was through their monuments, temples, and the stories of their deeds that the pharaohs achieved immortality. The pharaoh's legacy was vital, not just for their own remembrance, but also for the cultural continuity of Egypt itself. The way future generations would view the pharaohs, the monuments they left behind, and the myths that arose surrounding their lives played an essential role in ensuring that their influence continued to shape Egypt long after their death. The most iconic and enduring symbols of a pharaoh's legacy are the monumental structures they built. The pyramids of Giza, especially the Great Pyramid, stand as timeless monuments to the grandeur and ambition of Egypt's rulers. These massive stone structures, originally built as tombs, have become the ultimate symbol of Egypt's ancient civilization. Pharaohs like Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid, ensured that their names would be remembered for millennia. The grandeur of these monuments spoke not only of the pharaoh's wealth, but also of their divine status. The pyramids were built to ensure that the pharaoh's soul would ascend to the heavens and join the gods, but they also served as lasting symbols of the pharaoh's eternal power. The construction of temples, too, was an important part of a pharaoh's legacy. Temples were not only places of worship, but also architectural symbols of the pharaoh's connection to the divine. They were places where the pharaoh's divine status was reinforced and where rituals were performed to maintain cosmic order. Temples such as Karnak, Luxor, and Abu Simbel were built by pharaohs to honor the gods and demonstrate their own authority. These vast stone structures were adorned with reliefs and inscriptions that depicted the pharaoh's victories, their divine relationship with the gods, and their important role in maintaining Ma'at, divine order. Ramses II, known as Ramses the Great, was particularly successful in using monumental construction as a way of ensuring his legacy. His reign is marked by the creation of monumental statues and temples dedicated to both gods and himself. The Abu Simbel temples, carved into the side of a mountain in Nubia, are one of the most impressive examples of his legacy. These temples were not just built to honor the gods, but also to immortalize Ramses himself. The colossal statues of Ramses, seated at the entrance, are designed to project an image of the pharaoh as an eternal ruler, his face forever etched in stone, gazing out across the land he once ruled. Beyond architecture, the pharaoh's legacy was also secured through art, literature, and religious texts. The walls of temples and tombs were often decorated with intricate reliefs that told the story of the pharaoh's life, military campaigns, and relationship with the gods. These depictions often portrayed the pharaoh as a heroic figure, victorious in battle and favored by the gods. These artistic representations of the pharaoh were not only designed to honor them, but to reinforce the idea that they were divine. In the afterlife, the pharaoh's journey was believed to continue through these visual representations. Art was a vital tool in constructing the pharaoh's eternal narrative, ensuring their image lived on in both the material and spiritual worlds. Another important aspect of the pharaoh's legacy was their role in literature and religious texts. The pyramid texts, which are the oldest religious writings in the world, were carved into the tombs of the pharaohs. These texts were meant to guide the deceased pharaoh through the afterlife, helping them to achieve eternal life and maintain their divine status. Later texts, such as the Book of the Dead, continued this tradition, but they also ensured that the deeds of the pharaohs were passed down to future generations. These sacred texts were not just for the pharaoh's personal use. They were written to be shared, and to ensure that the pharaoh's legacy and connection to the divine would live on. The pharaoh's legacy was also reinforced by the priesthood. The priests played an essential role in maintaining the pharaoh's divine authority after death. They performed rituals in the pharaoh's name, ensuring that the gods remained favorable to the land of Egypt. The priests were the ones who continued to tell the pharaoh's story through generations, preserving Their memory in temples and sacred texts, they were the custodians of the pharaoh's divine power, and their work ensured that the pharaoh's influence continued long after their death. The pharaoh's legacy was also tied to the kingdom's future. A pharaoh who ruled justly, whose reign brought prosperity to the land, was remembered fondly. Their memory lived on in the stories told by the people, the songs sung by the bards, and the monuments built in their honor. Even pharaohs who were not remembered as great rulers could still leave behind lasting monuments and texts, ensuring that their name lived on in Egypt's history. However, the legacy of a pharaoh was not always guaranteed. Some pharaohs, particularly those who faced failure, were deliberately erased from history. One of the most striking examples of this is the pharaoh Akhenaten, who attempted to introduce monotheism by worshipping the sun god Aten and rejecting the traditional pantheon of Egyptian gods. Akhenaten's radical reforms were not popular, and after his death, his successor Tutankhamun and subsequent pharaohs tried to erase his memory from Egypt's historical records. Temples built to honor Aten were dismantled, and Akhenaten's name was removed from official records. This erasure highlights how a pharaoh's legacy could be deliberately destroyed if their reign was seen as a failure or if they were perceived as a threat to the traditional religious and political order. Despite this, many pharaohs left behind a legacy that was impossible to forget. The most successful pharaohs, through their monuments, temples, and lasting influence, ensured that their names would echo through time. The pharaohs were not just rulers, they were divine figures whose legacy was built into the very fabric of Egypt's identity. Their reigns shaped the culture, religion, and politics of Egypt for thousands of years, and their monuments continue to stand as symbols of their eternal power. In the end, the pharaoh's legacy was one of immortality. Though their bodies may have been entombed in the pyramids or mummified for the afterlife, their influence endured through the monuments they left behind, the stories told about them, and the divine favor they secured for Egypt. The death of a pharaoh was a profound event, not only for Egypt but also for the divine order itself. In ancient Egypt, death was not an end, but a transformation, and the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife was an essential part of their divine existence. The pharaoh, as the living god on earth, was believed to transcend to the afterlife, where they would join the gods in eternal life. This passage from the mortal world to the divine was marked by elaborate rituals, preparations, and a belief system that centered on the immortality of the pharaoh's soul. Upon the pharaoh's death, the kingdom would fall into a period of mourning, and the royal court would immediately begin preparing for the burial and the journey to the afterlife. This process was not only one of grieving, but also one of ensuring that the pharaoh's divine status was maintained after death. The pharaoh's body had to be preserved perfectly to prevent decay, as any corruption would threaten the integrity of their soul and their future in the afterlife. The embalming process, which led to mummification, was the cornerstone of ensuring that the pharaoh's body remained intact for the journey into the afterlife. The body was carefully treated with a mixture of resins and oils, and internal organs were removed and stored in canopic jars. The body was then wrapped in linen bandages, creating a mummified figure that could endure for millennia. The mummification process was an extremely sacred ritual performed by skilled embalmers, who followed strict religious protocols to ensure that the pharaoh would remain unharmed in the afterlife. The tomb, often a massive and elaborate structure, was the pharaoh's final resting place and their home for eternity. The construction of the tomb was a monumental undertaking, sometimes taking decades to complete. The most famous examples of these tombs are the pyramids, which were built to house the bodies of the pharaohs and their treasures. These tombs were not just places of burial, they were designed as gateways to the afterlife, ensuring that the pharaoh's journey to the next world was as smooth and prosperous as their reign had been. For a pharaoh, their tomb was not simply a burial site, it was a place of immortality. The walls of the tombs were often adorned with scenes depicting the pharaoh's life, as well as spells and incantations designed to guide them through the dangers of the afterlife. These texts, most famously known as the Pyramid Texts and later the Book of the Dead, were intended to help the pharaoh navigate the perilous journey to the afterlife, where they would be judged by Osiris, the god of the dead. The judgment would determine whether the pharaoh's soul would be granted eternal life or be cast into the abyss. The Book of the Dead was a key part of the pharaoh's journey. This sacred text contained spells, prayers, and instructions for the deceased to follow as they made their way through the underworld. The text described the various challenges the deceased would face, including encounters with hostile gods and creatures, and how they could successfully navigate these challenges to reach the Field of Reeds, a paradise where the soul would live eternally. The pharaoh's heart, believed to be the seat of their soul, would be weighed against the feather of Mahat, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was light and pure, the pharaoh would be granted immortality. If it was heavy with sin, the soul would be devoured by the monstrous goddess Ammit, ensuring that the pharaoh would never achieve eternal peace. Alongside the pharaoh's body, treasures and personal belongings were placed in the tomb. These items were believed to be needed in the afterlife, ensuring that the pharaoh would be well equipped for their eternal life. Statues, jewelry, food offerings, and even servants or attendants were included in some cases, all meant to ensure that the pharaoh lacked for nothing in the next world. These treasures, however, were not just for the pharaoh's comfort. They were symbols of the pharaoh's divine power, which would transcend into the afterlife. The funerary rituals that followed the pharaoh's death were crucial to ensuring the success of their journey. The opening of the mouth ceremony was performed by priests to restore the pharaoh's senses and allow them to function in the afterlife. This ceremony symbolized the pharaoh's resurrection and was performed at the tomb before the burial. Once the pharaoh had been mummified, entombed, and laid to rest, the court would conduct a final set of rituals to honor the pharaoh and ensure their eternal life. Even after the pharaoh's death, their influence did not disappear. The living pharaoh was succeeded by another ruler, but the deceased pharaoh's legacy continued to shape the kingdom. The new pharaoh would maintain the old pharaoh's tomb and continue to perform rituals in their honor, reinforcing the belief in the pharaoh's immortality and their ongoing role in the divine order of Egypt. The monuments, temples, and pyramids built during the pharaoh's reign would stand as eternal reminders of their greatness and their connection to the divine. The death of a pharaoh marked not just the end of a personal life, but the continuation of their divine journey. The pharaoh's legacy, both in the mortal world and the afterlife, was eternal. Their influence remained as long as their tombs stood, their monuments remained intact, and their rituals continued. It was through this divine immortality that the pharaohs of Egypt became more than mere rulers. They became gods, their reigns extending beyond death into eternity. The life of an Egyptian pharaoh was far more complex than the monuments and mysteries left behind by their reigns. From the grandiose pyramids to the meticulously detailed tombs, we often imagine the pharaohs as godlike figures whose lives were filled with luxury and power. But behind the gilded walls of palaces and temples, their existence was marked by political maneuvering, religious duties, and the weight of their people's expectations. For the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, their daily life was not just about wealth, but about upholding an unyielding connection with the gods. In this series, we're diving deep into what life was truly like for these ancient rulers, what they ate, how they lived, and the struggles they faced behind the scenes. This isn't the glorious depiction you often see on postcards or in movies. This is the raw, unfiltered life of a pharaoh. What did they sacrifice? What were their real duties? And how did they deal with the looming threat of rebellion, family, betrayal, and the ever-present shadow of death? Before diving deeper, consider this. The pharaoh wasn't just a king. The pharaoh was seen as the living God on earth, the intermediary between the people and the divine. Every action was carried out with this immense responsibility on their shoulders. It wasn't just about governing, it was about making sure that Egypt remained in harmony with the gods, ensuring prosperity and preventing the wrath of chaos from taking hold. But while the pharaohs were elevated to this celestial status, their lives were far from serene. Every pharaoh had to play a delicate balancing act between divine expectations and the harsh realities of running a massive empire. The daily life of a pharaoh wasn't as glamorous as one might think. While the world believed they lived in palaces, adorned with gold and jewels, their reality was often filled with tasks of divine importance and political necessity. Their role as ruler extended far beyond the luxurious feasts and ceremonies often associated with royalty. Every day began with ritual. The pharaoh's life was governed by the gods, and to maintain divine favor, the pharaoh had to begin each day with a prayer or sacrifice to the gods. The early mornings were often spent in the temple, where the pharaoh, surrounded by priests, would offer gifts to the gods. These offerings included food, incense, and precious items, all meant to ensure that the gods would smile upon the pharaoh's reign and, in turn, the entire kingdom. But the gods were not always in their favor. The Egyptians believed that the world was in a constant state of flux, and the pharaoh's primary job was to maintain Ma'at, the divine order of the universe. This wasn't an easy task. The pharaoh had to make decisions on everything from the management of the Nile River's flooding to military affairs and the economic health of Egypt. The pharaoh's day was filled with matters of governance, which were often mundane and far from the regal image we often associate with them. The day would consist of long hours spent in meetings with viziers, scribes, and military commanders. Laws were passed, taxes were levied, and orders for labor projects were given. The construction of monumental buildings such as temples, pyramids, and other royal structures was a continual source of labor for the pharaoh's people. These projects often took decades to complete and required the work of tens of thousands of laborers, many of whom were peasants who worked in rotation. In addition to these governmental duties, the pharaoh also had a significant role in maintaining the agricultural system. As Egypt was primarily an agrarian society, the health of the nation's crops directly influenced the pharaoh's popularity. The pharaoh would organize large-scale irrigation projects, manage grain storage, and ensure that there were no disruptions in the harvests. These actions were not only political, but also religious. A good harvest was seen as a sign of the pharaoh's favor with the gods, and a failed harvest could be seen as a sign of divine wrath with devastating consequences. In the evening, after the long and taxing responsibilities of governing were completed, the pharaoh would return to the palace. While the evening was a time for the pharaoh to rest, this was not a time for relaxation. They often attended ceremonial feasts or held audiences with foreign dignitaries. These events were meant to display the pharaoh's power and solidify alliances with neighboring regions. It was also the time for royal family matters to be handled, as the pharaoh's relationships with their wives, children, and other family members were critical to the stability of their reign. However, this sense of luxury and power was often marred by the pressure of maintaining one's divine status. Pharaohs were not immune to the pressures of politics, and many were constantly worried about potential uprisings or the possibility of being betrayed by their closest allies. The pharaoh's court was full of intrigue, with conspiracies often brewing beneath the surface. Despite the apparent luxury of their position, pharaohs lived in constant fear of assassination or betrayal. History is filled with accounts of royal families turning against one another in bloody power struggles. This undercurrent of tension and fear was a constant companion to the pharaoh's otherwise grand existence. Their lives were filled with this unsettling balance of immense power and the ever-looming fear of losing it. The court of the pharaoh was more than just a place of royal luxury. It was a hotbed of political maneuvering, intrigue, and backstabbing. Those who surrounded the pharaoh, viziers, military leaders, royal family members, and advisors, were constantly vying for power, seeking favor, and working behind the scenes to ensure their own survival and prosperity. It was a place where alliances were formed and broken, and where even the smallest misstep could lead to a dramatic fall from grace. At the center of this court was the pharaoh, the embodiment of divine rule. But while the pharaoh's power was absolute on paper, their authority was often shaped and influenced by the people around them. The viziers, the pharaoh's most trusted advisors, played an essential role in the day-to-day affairs of the kingdom. They were the ones who helped draft laws, levy taxes, and oversee the bureaucracy that kept Egypt running smoothly. However, these viziers were not simply trusted companions. They were often powerful men with their own ambitions, and some would go to great lengths to ensure they maintained their grip on power. The pharaoh's royal family also played a significant role in the court's politics. Succession was a delicate matter, and the pharaoh's heirs were often groomed from a young age to take on leadership roles. But family dynamics were rarely straightforward. Rivalries between siblings, disputes over the throne, and the constant pressure to produce a male heir could lead to devastating conflicts within the royal family. Some pharaohs, in an effort to secure their lineage, married within the family to keep the bloodline pure. This often led to tensions, as the question of who would inherit the throne was never far from the surface. This constant struggle for power was not just political, it was personal. Many pharaohs lived with the fear of being overthrown by their own family members. Assassinations and treacherous plots were common, and history records several instances where members of the royal family turned against each other in deadly conflicts. The fear of betrayal was so prevalent that it became part of the very fabric of life in the pharaoh's court. Perhaps the most notorious example of this kind of intrigue was the reign of Pharaoh Ramses III. His court was riddled with conspiracies, and his eventual assassination was the result of a plot by his own harem, led by one of his wives, T, who sought to place her son on the throne. This event, known as the harem conspiracy, is a grim reminder that even the most powerful pharaohs could not escape the treacherous politics of their own inner circles. But the pharaohs weren't just concerned with political plots within their court. They also had to contend with outside threats. Egypt's borders were often under threat from rival kingdoms, and pharaohs had to maintain a powerful military presence to protect their empire. The pharaoh was not only a ruler, they were also a military leader. They led armies into battle, defending Egypt from invaders such as the Hittites, Libyans, and later the Sea Peoples. Military victories were crucial to maintaining the pharaoh's divine status. A pharaoh who lost a battle risked losing their position of power, and in some cases, their life. These military campaigns were often brutal and required significant sacrifice. Pharaohs would organize large-scale military expeditions, leading thousands of soldiers across the desert and into foreign lands. The war was not just about conquering new territories, it was about maintaining Egypt's dominance in the ancient world. But these campaigns were often more than just political, they were deeply symbolic. A successful military campaign was seen as a victory for the gods and a reflection of the pharaoh's strength and divine favor. On the other hand, a failed campaign could result in the pharaoh being seen as weak or even punished by the gods. Despite their godlike status, the pharaohs were never truly safe from the political and personal dangers of their time. Their court was a place of constant tension, where one wrong move could lead to their downfall. Many pharaohs lived in fear of losing their throne, and even those with the greatest power could not escape the harsh realities of their position. In the royal court of ancient Egypt, family was everything. The pharaoh's family, particularly their immediate relatives, played a vital role in shaping the pharaoh's reign. The bloodline of the pharaoh was crucial, not just for maintaining the royal family's power, but also for the very legitimacy of the pharaoh's divine rule. The dynastic nature of ancient Egyptian rule meant that succession was always a matter of great concern, and ensuring the continuity of the royal bloodline was a priority for every pharaoh. A pharaoh's position as a living god meant that their descendants were expected to inherit this divine mantle. However, the path to succession was often filled with rivalries, tensions, and in some cases bloodshed. The pharaoh's heirs were often not only their sons, but also the children of their wives and concubines. This created a complex web of familial relationships where different factions within the family vied for control and power. The pharaoh typically had multiple wives, each vying for favor in the eyes of their husband, and importantly, in the eyes of the Egyptian people. The queen, often known as the Great Wife, held a position of high prestige and power. However, even the Great Wife's status was not always secure. In the highly competitive world of royal succession, the birth of a male heir was paramount. The pharaoh's primary duty was to ensure that his dynasty continued, and the birth of a son who would inherit the throne was the most important event in his reign. But the birth of heirs was no guarantee of smooth succession. Rivalry between the pharaoh's wives and their sons was common. If a son from a lesser wife or concubine seemed more capable or more favored by the people, it could ignite fierce competition between the royal offspring. The famous example of this is the struggle between Pharaoh Ramses II's sons. Although Ramses II had many children with his numerous wives, his sons competed fiercely for the throne, which led to conflict within the royal family. One of the most famous examples of this rivalry is the reign of Amenhotep IV, later known as Akhenaten. Akhenaten's reign was a unique and controversial one, marked by religious reforms and the establishment of Aten, the sun disk, as the sole god. However, his reign was also plagued by internal strife. Akhenaten's relationship with his royal family became strained, particularly with his father Amenhotep III and his own sons, including the eventual pharaoh Tutankhamun. The religious upheaval caused by Akhenaten's changes to the Egyptian pantheon weakened the royal family, and upon his death, the throne was left to a child, Tutankhamun, who was not well equipped to handle the political and military challenges of his time. The young pharaoh's reign was marked by power struggles and ultimately his untimely death at a young age. This tension within the royal family was not confined to the direct line of succession. It also extended to the extended family, including uncles, cousins, and in-laws. These relatives, who had close access to the pharaoh, often found themselves caught up in the complex web of politics and intrigue. One of the most famous instances of this kind of familial power struggle occurred during the reign of Pharaoh Ramses III, who was ultimately the victim of a palace coup orchestrated by his own family. His wife, T, conspired with other members of the royal court to place her son on the throne, leading to Ramses III's assassination in a bloody and brutal manner. This event, known as the Harem Conspiracy, serves as a stark reminder that even the most powerful pharaohs were not immune to betrayal from their closest kin. The fear of betrayal by family members was always a threat to the pharaoh. Despite their godlike status, pharaohs were not immune to the political scheming and power struggles that plagued the courts of kings and emperors around the world. The intense focus on bloodlines and succession created an environment where loyalty was constantly tested and alliances could be broken in the pursuit of power. In the royal court of ancient Egypt, family was everything. The pharaoh's family, particularly their immediate relatives, played a vital role in shaping the pharaoh's reign. The bloodline of the pharaoh was crucial not just for maintaining the royal family's power, but also for the very legitimacy of the pharaoh's divine rule. The dynastic nature of ancient Egyptian rule meant that succession was always a matter of great concern, and ensuring the continuity of the royal bloodline was a priority for every pharaoh. A pharaoh's position as a living god meant that their descendants were expected to inherit this divine mantle. However, the path to succession was often filled with rivalries, tensions, and in some cases, bloodshed. The pharaoh's heirs were often not only their sons, but also the children of their wives and concubines. This created a complex web of familial relationships, where different factions within the family vied for control and power. The pharaoh typically had multiple wives, each vying for favor in the eyes of their husband and, importantly, in the eyes of the Egyptian people. The queen, often known as the Great Wife, held a position of high prestige and power. However, even the Great Wife's status was not always secure. In the highly competitive world of royal succession, the birth of a male heir was paramount. The pharaoh's primary duty was to ensure that his dynasty continued, and the birth of a son who would inherit the throne was the most important event in his reign. But the birth of heirs was no guarantee of smooth succession. Rivalry between the pharaoh's wives and their sons was common. If a son from a lesser wife or concubine seemed more capable or more favored by the people, it could ignite fierce competition between the royal offspring. The famous example of this is the struggle between Pharaoh Ramses II's sons. Although Ramses II had many children with his numerous wives, his sons competed fiercely for the throne, which led to conflict within the royal family. One of the most famous examples of this rivalry is the reign of Amenhotep IV, later known as Akhenaten. Akhenaten's reign was a unique and controversial one, marked by religious reforms and the establishment of Aten, the sun disk, as the sole god. However, his reign was also plagued by internal strife. Akhenaten's relationship with his royal family became strained, particularly with his father Amenhotep III and his own sons, including the eventual pharaoh Tutankhamun. The religious upheaval caused by Akhenaten's changes to the Egyptian pantheon weakened the royal family, and upon his death, the throne was left to a child, Tutankhamun, who was not well equipped to handle the political and military challenges of his time. The young pharaoh's reign was marked by power struggles, and ultimately his untimely death at a young age. This tension within the royal family was not confined to the direct line of succession. It also extended to the extended family, including uncles, cousins, and in-laws. These relatives, who had close access to the pharaoh, often found themselves caught up in the complex web of politics and intrigue. One of the most famous instances of this kind of familial power struggle occurred during the reign of Pharaoh Ramses III, who was ultimately the victim of a palace coup orchestrated by his own family. His wife T conspired with other members of the royal court to place her son on the throne, leading to Ramses III's assassination in a bloody and brutal manner. This event, known as the Harem Conspiracy, serves as a stark reminder that even the most powerful pharaohs were not immune to betrayal from their closest kin. The fear of betrayal by family members was always a threat to the pharaoh. Despite their godlike status, pharaohs were not immune to the political scheming and power struggles that plagued the courts of kings and emperors around the world. The intense focus on bloodlines and succession created an environment where loyalty was constantly tested and alliances could be broken in the pursuit of power. The Pharaoh of Egypt was not merely a political leader or a military commander. They were also the high priest of every temple, the intermediary between the gods and the people. Their reign was bound up with their divine duty, and maintaining the gods' favor was essential for the survival and prosperity of Egypt. This religious role was one of the most important aspects of the pharaoh's daily life and governance. The pharaoh's position as the earthly representative of the gods was a title that transcended mere political leadership. In the eyes of the Egyptians, the pharaoh was considered a living god, specifically the incarnation of Horus, the god of kingship and the sky. The divine connection that the pharaoh held with the gods was central to their authority and was crucial for maintaining the cosmic order known as Ma'at. This divine responsibility ensured that the pharaoh's decisions were not just political or military, they were also religiously significant, shaping the moral and spiritual framework of the kingdom. In every aspect of life, the pharaoh was required to uphold Ma'at, which represented truth, justice, harmony, and cosmic order. The pharaoh's success in maintaining Ma'at was directly tied to the well-being of the people. If the pharaoh failed to keep order in the land, if crops failed, if the Nile did not flood at the right time, the pharaoh would be held responsible. In a society where religion and governance were inseparable, the pharaoh's divine status was constantly under scrutiny. A failure in maintaining order could lead to widespread belief that the gods had withdrawn their favor, a situation that could provoke rebellion or lead to divine punishment. Each day, the pharaoh's religious duties began at dawn with offerings made at the temple to the gods. These offerings were presented to the chief deity of the pharaoh's reign, whether it was Amun, Ra, or later Aten. The temple itself was not just a place of worship, but also a vital administrative center where priests and officials would report to the pharaoh on various matters, including the state of the Nile River, the agricultural yields, and any signs of divine favor or displeasure. The pharaoh's most significant religious responsibility was the ritual of the opening of the mouth. This ceremony was performed at the tomb of the pharaoh after death, where a priest would reenact the ceremony that allowed the pharaoh's spirit to access the afterlife. During their lifetime, the pharaoh also had a daily ritual of appeasing the gods to ensure their continued favor, praying for blessings upon the land, the people, and the pharaoh's own family. This daily routine reinforced the idea that the pharaoh was not just a leader of men, but a conduit for divine will on earth. In addition to the daily rituals, the pharaoh also had to oversee the major religious festivals that marked the calendar. These festivals were grand affairs, with processions, sacrifices, music, and feasts. They were occasions for the pharaoh to display their connection with the gods and their ability to bring prosperity and favor to the land. The most important, Of these festivals was the Opet festival, which was held to honor Amun, the king of the gods. During this festival, the pharaoh would journey from the temple of Karnak to the temple of Luxor, accompanied by priests, soldiers, and the people. The journey itself was a symbolic reenactment of the pharaoh's divine power to bring balance and order to Egypt. The pharaoh's religious duties also included the maintenance and restoration of temples and other religious structures. Throughout Egypt, there were grand temples dedicated to the gods, each representing a different facet of Egyptian belief. As the supreme ruler, the pharaoh was responsible for ensuring that these temples were well maintained and that the gods were properly worshipped. In some cases, pharaohs would commission the construction of massive temples to honor their chosen deity or to consolidate their own power. For example, Ramses II, known for his monumental building projects, constructed the massive Abu Simbel, temples to honor the gods and to memorialize his own reign. However, this divine responsibility was not without its challenges. As the central figure in the Egyptian pantheon, the pharaoh was constantly under pressure to ensure the gods remained pleased with his reign. If the gods were displeased, the consequences could be severe. A failure to keep order in Egypt could lead to famine, disease, or military defeat. In times of crisis, the pharaoh would often conduct rituals or sacrifice to appease the gods, hoping to regain their favor. These actions were not just symbolic. They were seen as the pharaoh's duty to ensure Egypt's survival. But perhaps the most powerful religious role of the pharaoh was their involvement in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that the pharaoh was the only one who could achieve immortality. Upon death, the pharaoh was believed to ascend to the heavens, joining the gods in the afterlife. The construction of the pharaoh's tomb was therefore a monumental task, and the most famous of these tombs were the pyramids. These enormous structures were designed to protect the pharaoh's body and provide everything the pharaoh would need in the afterlife, including food, treasure, and servants. This belief in the pharaoh's divine immortality was central to the culture of ancient Egypt. It reinforced the idea that the pharaoh's reign was eternal and that Egypt itself would endure as long as the gods continued to favor the pharaoh. Though often remembered for their divine status and ceremonial roles, the pharaohs were also military leaders who had to ensure the protection and expansion of Egypt. Their responsibilities were not just limited to governance and religion. They were also tasked with defending Egypt from external threats and, at times, expanding its borders through military conquest. The pharaoh's role as a military commander was integral to their authority, as success on the battlefield solidified their status as a leader favored by the gods, while failure could lead to humiliation, rebellion, or loss of power. In the eyes of the Egyptians, the pharaoh was the supreme warrior, the one who led the nation's armies to victory, guided by divine will. The pharaoh's military prowess was a critical aspect of their reign, as Egypt's security and prosperity depended heavily on their ability to ward off invaders and maintain peace within the empire. The role of the pharaoh as a military leader was not a symbolic one. It was very real, with the pharaoh often leading troops into battle or at least overseeing military campaigns from the front lines. The Egyptian army under the pharaoh's leadership was a well-organized and powerful force. The pharaoh relied on a system of military divisions, each with a specialized task. The infantry was the backbone of the Egyptian army, but over time, specialized units such as chariot forces and archers became increasingly important. The pharaoh would command and direct these forces during campaigns, ensuring that Egypt's borders remained secure and that they could successfully wage war on neighboring territories when necessary. One of the most famous military leaders in Egyptian history was Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great. Ramses II is renowned for his military campaigns, most notably the Battle of Kadesh, which took place during the early part of his reign. The battle, fought against the Hittites, was one of the largest chariot battles in history. Though the outcome of the battle remains debated, some sources claim it was a stalemate, while others say Ramses won. Ramses portrayed himself as victorious. The battle itself was a defining moment in his reign, and he commemorated it by building several monuments, including the famous reliefs at Abu Simbel, which depict his might and divine favor. Despite the grandeur of such battles, the pharaoh's military role wasn't always about conquest and glory. The Egyptian military was also tasked with maintaining order in the vast lands of Egypt. The pharaoh needed to ensure that the regions of Egypt, from Upper Egypt in the south to Lower Egypt in the north, remained under control. Occasionally, rebellions would break out within the kingdom, and the pharaoh would need to suppress them with force. This could involve military expeditions into rebellious regions or organizing defensive measures to safeguard important cities and trade routes. In times of peace, the pharaoh's military leadership extended to the maintenance of fortifications and strategic infrastructure. Egypt's borders, particularly along the Nile and the Sinai Peninsula, needed to be fortified to protect against raiders and rival empires. Ramses II and other pharaohs also engaged in strategic diplomacy, forging alliances through marriage, tribute and trade agreements to maintain Egypt's stability without resorting to war. The pharaohs also had to maintain Egypt's naval capabilities. Although Egypt was not as maritime-focused as some of its neighbors, such as the Phoenicians, the Egyptian navy, however, was important for controlling trade routes along the Nile and protecting Egypt's coastline. Pharaohs ensured that the navy was well equipped to defend against maritime threats, including pirate raids and foreign incursions from the Mediterranean. The military role of the pharaoh was deeply intertwined with Egypt's religious beliefs. Egyptians believed that military victories were a direct sign of divine approval. The gods were seen as actively participating in Egypt's military triumphs, and pharaohs often credited their success in battle to the favor of gods like Amun-Ra or Horus. After a military campaign, the pharaoh would often hold victory celebrations, which included offerings and sacrifices to the gods in thanks for their assistance in ensuring victory. However, not every pharaoh was a skilled military commander, and some found themselves struggling on the battlefield. Military defeats had serious consequences for pharaohs. If a pharaoh lost a significant battle or failed to protect Egypt from foreign invaders, it was seen as a sign of weakness and could lead to a loss of divine favor. Pharaohs who suffered military defeats were often forced to face rebellion at home, as the people and military leaders lost confidence in their ability to protect the kingdom. The fear of military defeat was particularly evident in the reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten, who, though primarily known for his religious reforms, faced instability within Egypt due to his abandonment of the traditional gods and the traditional military alliances. This religious upheaval weakened Egypt's position in the region, and when Egypt's enemies grew stronger, Akhenaten's military power was insufficient to protect the kingdom. His successor Tutankhamun inherited an Egypt in turmoil, and, although Tutankhamun himself was a young child, his reign involved efforts to restore Egypt's military standing. Even more so than in the ancient world of other empires, the pharaoh's military leadership had an intense spiritual component. The pharaoh was believed to be the earthly embodiment of Horus, and to fail in military endeavors was seen as a failure to uphold the divine order. As a result, military success was seen as essential not just to the survival of Egypt, but also to the maintenance of Ma'at, the cosmic balance of the universe. This belief was reinforced by the pharaoh's personal involvement in military campaigns, where their role was both to lead armies and to act as a divine protector of Egypt. The pharaoh, as the supreme ruler of Egypt, held an unparalleled position within society. They were not just a king or a leader in the traditional sense, they were seen as the living embodiment of the divine. The pharaoh's existence was intertwined with that of the gods, and they were viewed as the intermediary between the gods and the people. The pharaoh's role was to ensure that the divine order, or Ma'at, was maintained, not just within the palace but throughout Egypt itself. Their every action had the potential to affect the lives of millions, from the common laborer to the high-ranking officials. As the intermediary between the divine and the mortal, the pharaoh was responsible for upholding the harmony and balance that the gods intended for the world. It was the pharaoh's duty to perform rituals, offer sacrifices, and act as the chief priest in all matters concerning religion. Through these rituals, the pharaoh ensured that the gods' favor was maintained and that Egypt prospered. Without the pharaoh's guidance, it was believed that the gods would turn their backs on the land, causing famine, disease, or even war. Therefore, the pharaoh's connection with the gods wasn't just symbolic, it was absolutely vital for the functioning of the kingdom. The pharaoh's position, though powerful, was not without its complexities. They were expected to maintain a delicate balance between their divine duties and their responsibilities as a ruler of a kingdom. As much as they were expected to perform rituals and ensure religious order, the pharaoh also had to manage the practical needs of society. They were responsible for ensuring the well-being of their people, overseeing agriculture, managing resources, and maintaining law and order. In Egypt, where agriculture was the backbone of the economy, the pharaoh was central to the agricultural cycle. One of the most crucial responsibilities of the pharaoh was to ensure that the Nile River flooded at the right time, providing the necessary nutrients to the soil. The pharaoh would pray to the gods, offer sacrifices, and perform ceremonies to ensure that the Nile would flood in such a way as to ensure a bountiful harvest. The flood of the Nile was symbolic of the rejuvenation of life, and without it, Egypt's prosperity would collapse. This responsibility extended beyond simply ensuring a good harvest. The pharaoh also oversaw the distribution of food and resources, ensuring that no one in the kingdom went hungry. Especially during times of drought or famine, they were seen as the provider, the one who sustained the people through times of crisis. During famines, the pharaoh would often be expected to take drastic action, such as organizing food redistribution or building irrigation systems, in order to alleviate the suffering of the common people. Though they were revered as gods on earth, the pharaohs also had a deep understanding of the weight of their duties. They knew that their reign could fall under the scrutiny of the people. Unlike in some empires where rulers were seen as untouchable, the pharaoh's legitimacy rested on their ability to rule justly and maintain the favor of the gods. No pharaoh who was seen as ineffective, weak, or corrupt could face uprisings or worse, the withdrawal of divine favor, which was seen as a direct cause of Egypt's decline. In terms of governance, the pharaoh relied heavily on a network of officials, including viziers, scribes, and military commanders, to help administer the kingdom. These officials acted as the pharaoh's representatives, overseeing everything from law enforcement to taxation, while the pharaoh remained largely involved in the ceremonial and religious duties of the state. The pharaoh, however, still had the final say on matters of policy, law, and military action, and all decisions were made with the goal of preserving the divine order and securing Egypt's prosperity. One of the pharaoh's most important roles was to provide stability and justice. The pharaoh was the ultimate judge in the kingdom, responsible for making decisions in matters of law and punishment. It was the pharaoh's duty to ensure that laws were enforced fairly and that justice was upheld, no matter the social class of the person involved. The pharaoh's court was the final arbiter in all disputes, and their decisions were seen as being backed by divine authority. A just and wise pharaoh was highly revered, while a ruler who failed to uphold justice was seen as corrupt and unfit to rule. The pharaoh also had to maintain the loyalty of the people. Public opinion, while not as openly influential as in modern democracies, still played a role in the pharaoh's reign. The people had to be kept content and appeased, whether through providing food during lean times, organizing festivals and celebrations, or ensuring that the gods were honored through grand religious ceremonies. The pharaoh's ability to win the support of the people was crucial for the stability of their reign. This connection with the people was symbolized through the pharaoh's role in public ceremonies and festivals. The pharaoh would often appear at these events, not only to be seen by the people, but also to demonstrate their divine right to rule. These festivals were an essential part of Egypt's social and religious life, bringing the people together to celebrate the gods and reaffirm the pharaoh's status as the living god on earth. The festivals were opportunities for the pharaoh to show that they had the favor of the gods and that their rule brought prosperity to Egypt. Despite all these divine and royal duties, the pharaoh was also expected to be a family leader. Their family, particularly their wives and children, played important roles within the kingdom. The pharaoh's wives and children were often involved in the management of the royal court and were key players in the political and religious affairs of Egypt. However, the pharaoh was still the central figure in the family. Their role as father, husband, and ruler were all part of their divine responsibility. The family dynamics of the royal house were often tense, with the constant pressure to produce heirs and secure the future of the dynasty. The pharaoh's symbols of power were central to the image of divine kingship that defined their rule. These symbols were not merely ornamental, they represented the pharaoh's authority, connection to the gods, and divine right to rule over Egypt. The crown, scepter, and other regalia that the pharaoh wore or wielded were visual representations of their dominance, both in the earthly realm and in the spiritual realm. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh's attire and regalia were an essential part of their identity. These symbols were not only a sign of their status, but also a way to communicate their divine mandate to rule. The pharaoh's regalia allowed them to present themselves as both the earthly ruler and a divine being who was entrusted with the sacred duty of maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order. The crown, the symbol of divine kingship, the most important symbol of the pharaoh's authority, was the crown, which signified their divine right to rule. The crown had multiple forms, each representing different aspects of Egypt's power. The two most iconic crowns were the Hedjet, white crown, of Upper Egypt, and the Deshret, red crown, of Lower Egypt. The pharaoh would often wear both crowns, together symbolizing the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, and this duality was a central theme in Egyptian kingship. Wearing both crowns together was known as the Pshent, or double crown, which represented the pharaoh's role as the ruler of all Egypt. The white crown of Upper Egypt, which was shaped like a tall conical cap, was one of the oldest symbols of Egyptian royalty. The red crown of Lower Egypt was simpler and more circular, often with a flared top. Each crown had its own distinct significance. The white crown was associated with Horus, the god of kingship, and the red crown was connected to Set, the god of chaos and desert storms. The pharaoh, by wearing both crowns, symbolized their control over both the order of the Upper Nile and the chaotic forces of the Lower Nile. In addition to the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, the pharaoh could also wear the Khepresh, or blue, crown, which was a ceremonial crown worn during battle and in important state rituals. The blue crown, decorated with a uraeus, a cobra representing protection and sovereignty, was seen as a symbol of the pharaoh's military power. The use of the blue crown in battle highlighted the pharaoh's role as the defender of Egypt and a warrior chosen by the gods. The scepter, the pharaoh's instrument of authority, the pharaoh's scepter, or heka, was another powerful symbol of their authority. The scepter was typically carried by the pharaoh during rituals, processions, and state ceremonies, symbolizing their ability to rule with divine will. The scepter was often depicted as a long, straight staff with a crook at one end and a flail at the other. The crook represented the pharaoh's role as the shepherd of the people, guiding and protecting them, while the flail symbolized the pharaoh's authority to punish and maintain order. Together, the crook and flail represented the dual aspects of kingship, the ruler as both a protector and a disciplinarian. The scepter was also connected to the gods. In the early dynastic periods, the scepter was believed to be a gift from the god Horus, and later it became a symbol of the pharaoh's divine connection to the sun god Ra. By holding the scepter, the pharaoh demonstrated their divine authority and their role as the earthly representative of the gods. The Ankh, the symbol of life and immortality. The Ankh is perhaps the most recognizable symbol associated with ancient Egypt. Often depicted in the pharaoh's hand, the Ankh symbolized eternal life and immortality. The shape of the Ankh resembles a cross with a loop at the top, and it represented the divine life force that the pharaoh was believed to possess. The pharaoh, as the living god, was considered to be the giver of life, and the Ankh symbolized their role in sustaining the life of Egypt and ensuring its continued prosperity. The pharaoh's association with the Ankh extended beyond their reign. It was believed that the pharaoh's divine life force would persist even after death, as they would continue to rule in the afterlife. The Ankh was also a powerful symbol of the pharaoh's ability to transcend mortality and ascend to the gods after death. In many depictions, the pharaoh is shown receiving the Ankh from the gods, indicating their divinely granted immortality. The uraeus, the cobra of protection, another powerful symbol of the pharaoh's divine rule, was the uraeus, the image of a cobra that was often worn on the pharaoh's crown. The uraeus represented the goddess Wadjet, the protector of Lower Egypt, and it symbolized the pharaoh's divine right to rule and their role as the defender of Egypt. The cobra was often depicted as raised, ready to strike, symbolizing the pharaoh's readiness to protect the kingdom from enemies, both external and internal. The uraeus was an emblem of divine protection, and it was believed that the pharaoh, with the cobra on their crown, had the power to ward off evil and maintain ma'at. In battle, the uraeus was a symbol of the pharaoh's strength, protection, and divine sanction to engage in military campaigns. It also represented the pharaoh's power over chaos, as the cobra, a symbol of both life and death, was seen as a force that could both destroy enemies and protect the kingdom. The scarab, the symbol of rebirth and resurrection. The scarab beetle, often associated with the god Khepri, was another powerful symbol of the pharaoh's divine rule. Khepri, depicted as a man with a scarab head, or as a full scarab, was the god of the rising sun and rebirth. The scarab symbolized the pharaoh's role in ensuring the cyclical rebirth of the land, the people, and the cosmos. The pharaoh's association with Khepri reinforced their role as the central figure in Egypt's cosmic renewal, ensuring that the kingdom would experience perpetual prosperity and stability. Scarabs were often used in royal seals and jewelry and were placed in the tombs of pharaohs to ensure their successful journey to the afterlife. The scarab's symbolism of rebirth and resurrection was particularly important in the context of the pharaoh's divine immortality. As the pharaoh's soul would continue to live on in the afterlife, the scarab's symbolism reinforced the belief that the pharaoh would be reborn and continue to rule in the next world. The pharaoh's regalia, a divine identity. The various regalia of the pharaoh were not mere accessories. They were integral to the pharaoh's identity as the living god and the ruler of Egypt. These symbols represented the pharaoh's divine right to rule, their ability to protect Egypt, and their role in maintaining cosmic order. The crowns, scepters, and other symbols were used during rituals, ceremonies, and battles to reinforce the pharaoh's image and authority. Through these symbols, the pharaoh presented themselves not only as a ruler, but as a bridge between the gods and the people of Egypt. Their divine identity was reinforced by the regalia they wore and the sacred duties they performed. The pharaoh's regalia, from the double crown to the cobra on their forehead, ensured that they were seen as the rightful divinely chosen ruler who maintained order and prosperity in Egypt. Throughout Egypt's long history, religion was not just a facet of life, it was the very foundation upon which the kingdom was built. The pharaoh's relationship with the gods was paramount, and their role as the living god on earth was central to their authority. However, some pharaohs sought to reform Egypt's religious practices, either to consolidate their own power, express a personal belief, or shift the focus of worship toward a single deity. These religious reforms were often met with resistance as they challenged deeply ingrained traditions that had been practiced for centuries. Despite the challenges, these reforms were pivotal moments in Egyptian history, reflecting the pharaohs' divine mandate and their influence over Egypt's spiritual life. Amenhotep IV and the rise of Atenism, one of the most radical religious reforms in Egyptian history, came during the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep IV, who later changed his name to Akhenaten. Akhenaten's religious revolution focused on the worship of Aten, the sun disk, above all other gods. Prior to Akhenaten's reign, Egypt had a polytheistic belief system, with gods such as Amun, Ra, and Osiris being venerated at great temples across the kingdom. The priesthood of Amun at Karnak held great power, and the worship of this deity was at the heart of Egypt's religious practices. However, Akhenaten sought to shift Egypt's religious focus to Aten, effectively diminishing the role of Amun and other gods in Egyptian society. Akhenaten's decision to prioritize the worship of Aten was unprecedented. He ordered the closure of temples dedicated to Amun and other gods, and he directed that the traditional priesthoods be stripped of their power and wealth. He even moved the capital of Egypt from Thebes to a newly constructed city called Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, dedicated entirely to the worship of Aten. This move further solidified his devotion to Aten and distanced the pharaoh from the traditional religious practices of Egypt. Akhenaten's religious reforms were not limited to the physical relocation of the capital. He also changed the art and iconography of Egypt, introducing a more naturalistic and informal style that contrasted with the traditional stylized depictions of gods and royalty. The pharaoh and his queen, Nefertiti, were depicted in intimate, humanized forms, emphasizing their connection with the sun god. This shift in artistic representation was symbolic of Akhenaten's desire to break from tradition and create a new monotheistic religious system focused solely on Aten. However, Akhenaten's religious revolution was short-lived. After his death, his successor Tutankhamun reversed these reforms, restoring the worship of Amun and re-establishing the old religious order. The temples dedicated to Aten were abandoned, and the city of Akhetaten was eventually lost to history. Despite Akhenaten's failure to maintain his religious vision, his reign is remembered for the bold attempt to centralize Egypt's religious practices around a single god. His reforms, though brief, reflect the pharaoh's role as not only a political and military leader, but also as the ultimate authority in shaping Egypt's spiritual and cultural identity. The role of the priesthood in Egyptian religion. While Akhenaten sought to weaken the power of the priesthood, the traditional Egyptian religious structure was deeply rooted in the influence of the clergy. The priesthood of Amun, in particular, held considerable sway over Egypt's spiritual and political life. The high priests of Amun were powerful figures who controlled vast wealth and land holdings, and they were closely tied to the pharaoh's rule. As the high priests were seen as the intermediaries between the gods and the people, their authority in Egypt's religious matters could sometimes rival that of the pharaoh. For many pharaohs, maintaining a good relationship with the priesthood was essential. The priests played a crucial role in legitimizing the pharaoh's rule, conducting rituals, and ensuring that the kingdom remained in divine favor. The pharaoh's ability to placate the priesthood and maintain their support was often seen as vital for the success of their reign. As the highest religious authority in Egypt, the pharaoh's position was intrinsically tied to the stability and power of the priesthood. The balance of power between the pharaoh and the priests could shift, depending on the individual ruler's relationship with the clergy. Ramses II and the revival of traditional worship. Ramses II, known as Ramses the Great, is one of Egypt's most iconic and successful pharaohs. He ruled for over 6 decades, and his reign is marked by military victories, monumental building projects, and a return to traditional religious practices. After the upheavals of Akhenaten's religious revolution, Ramses II worked to restore Egypt's traditional polytheistic beliefs, reinforcing the worship of the gods who had been venerated for centuries. Ramses II built and restored temples dedicated to various deities, including Amun-Ra, and he played a crucial role in reasserting the power of the priesthood. One of the most famous religious monuments from Ramses II's reign is the Abu Simbel temples, carved into a mountainside in Nubia. These massive temples, dedicated to Ramses himself and the gods Amun, Ra-Horakhti, and Ptah, were not only architectural marvels but also symbolic of Ramses's divine right to rule. The statues at Abu Simbel depict Ramses as a colossal figure, seated with the gods, reinforcing the idea that he was the living god on earth. The restoration of traditional religious practices under Ramses II emphasized the pharaoh's role as the intermediary between the gods and the people of Egypt. The pharaoh's divine right to rule was reaffirmed through their association with the gods, and the temples they built served as permanent reminders of their spiritual and political authority. Religious shifts under later pharaohs, while the religious reforms of Akhenaten and their eventual reversal by his successors are among the most famous shifts in Egyptian religious practices, were not always as dramatic. Throughout Egypt's long history, various pharaohs sought to emphasize the worship of particular deities, depending on their reign and the needs of the kingdom. For example, during the 19th dynasty, pharaohs like Seti I and Ramses II emphasized the worship of Amun-Ra, one of the most powerful deities in Egypt. However, later pharaohs, such as those of the 20th dynasty, began to shift the religious landscape toward a greater emphasis on Osiris, the god of the afterlife, as Egypt faced internal and external challenges. The rise of Osiris worship reflected changing concerns about death and the afterlife, especially as Egypt experienced periods of political instability. Pharaohs like Thutmose IV and Amenhotep III also emphasized the worship of solar deities, such as Ra, to legitimize their rule. The pharaohs of these periods used religious shifts to reinforce their connection to the gods and maintain their authority over Egypt. The decline of religious reform and the return to tradition. By the time of the late period, 664–332 BCE, Egypt's religious practices had largely returned to the traditional polytheistic system. After centuries of religious upheavals, reforms, and shifts in power, the old gods of Egypt, Amun, Ra, Osiris, Isis, and others, remained central to Egyptian culture. The pharaoh's role as a divine ruler, chosen by the gods to protect and maintain Ma'at, was firmly entrenched in Egyptian society. In the final years of the pharaohs, with the arrival of foreign invaders such as the Persians and the Macedonian Greeks, Egyptian religion was gradually influenced by outside cultures. However, the core of Egypt's religious practices, rooted in the worship of gods and the divine right of the pharaoh, persisted until the decline of the ancient Egyptian civilization. The pharaoh's influence in ancient Egypt was not only limited to political, religious, and military realms, but also deeply embedded in the kingdom's culture and art. As the supreme ruler, the pharaoh's image was immortalized in statues, paintings, reliefs, and monuments, ensuring that their legacy would endure for millennia. The pharaohs used art as a powerful tool to assert their divine authority, celebrate their victories, and solidify their place in Egypt's cultural and spiritual fabric. Art in ancient Egypt was closely tied to religion and the pharaoh's divine status. The creations were meant to honor the gods, reflect divine order, and serve as eternal representations of the pharaoh's power. While the forms and techniques of Egyptian art remained consistent for centuries, the role of the pharaoh in this artistic tradition was crucial. Art was not only for aesthetic pleasure, it was a way to communicate the pharaoh's divine mission and reaffirm their eternal rule, both in the mortal world and the afterlife. Pharaohs in sculpture and monuments. One of the most lasting contributions of the pharaohs to Egyptian culture was the vast array of monumental sculptures and statues that they commissioned. These works of art, often placed in temples, tombs, and public spaces, were designed to represent the pharaoh as both a mortal king and a god. The most iconic of these statues are the colossal depictions of pharaohs like Ramses II, whose statues at Abu Simbel stand as symbols of his grandeur and divine power. These giant figures, carved into rock, depict Ramses II seated with gods, emphasizing his connection to the divine and his role as the eternal ruler. Similarly, the Great Sphinx of Giza, with the body of a lion and the head of Pharaoh Khafre, is one of the most famous examples of Egyptian art and architecture. The Sphinx symbolizes the pharaoh's strength, wisdom, and divine protection over Egypt. The sheer scale of these works was not just a reflection of the pharaoh's power, but also a testament to their ability to command vast resources and labor, to create art that would last for eternity. Sculptures of the pharaoh were also placed in temples and tombs to ensure that the pharaoh's presence continued after their death. These statues were intended to act as intermediaries between the mortal and divine worlds, representing the pharaoh as a living god whose power and influence transcended the physical world. The pharaoh's image was also used to depict the pharaoh in the act of giving offerings to the gods, reinforcing their role as the divine intermediary and protector of Egypt. Hieroglyphics and the pharaoh's divine words One of the most distinctive elements of Egyptian culture was its system of writing, hieroglyphics. The pharaohs were often depicted holding or surrounded by scrolls inscribed with hieroglyphs, which were believed to have sacred power. These hieroglyphs were not just words, they were considered to have a divine magical quality. Written words, especially those associated with the pharaoh, were viewed as powerful incantations capable of influencing the gods and the world around them. Hieroglyphics were used extensively in temples, tombs, and monuments, often to record the pharaoh's deeds, victories, and offerings to the gods. The most famous example of this is the Rosetta Stone, which allowed modern scholars to decode hieroglyphs and understand the significance of ancient Egyptian writing. The inscriptions on the walls of temples and tombs were not just historical records. They were meant to preserve the pharaoh's memory and ensure their legacy would endure through time. The inscriptions also played a key role in the pharaoh's afterlife. Texts such as the Pyramid Texts and the Book of the Dead were inscribed on the walls of royal tombs and pyramids. These sacred texts were designed to guide the pharaoh through the trials of the afterlife, ensuring their safe passage to the divine realm and reaffirming their immortality. In this way, the written word was directly tied to the pharaoh's divine journey and their eternal rule. Artistic depictions of the pharaoh, a divine image. The artistic depictions of the pharaoh were highly stylized and idealized to reinforce their divine status. In many cases, pharaohs were depicted as larger than life, often shown as towering figures in comparison to other people or gods. These artistic conventions were used to symbolize the pharaoh's superiority and godlike qualities. The pharaoh's image was often portrayed with a serene, composed expression, embodying the idea of a ruler who was both wise and divinely favored. The pharaoh's role in art extended beyond statues and monuments to include painting and relief work. Temples and tombs were decorated with elaborate paintings and reliefs that depicted scenes from the pharaoh's life, including their military victories, religious ceremonies, and interactions with the gods. These scenes were carefully crafted to reinforce the idea that the pharaoh was not only a ruler, but a divine figure who maintained order and harmony in the world. One of the most notable examples of royal art is found in the tomb of Tutankhamun, where intricate paintings and objects vividly depict his reign. The tomb's treasures, such as the famous Golden Death Mask, became an icon of the pharaoh's legacy and are now considered some of the most important works of art from ancient Egypt. These works were not just artistic achievements, they were essential parts of the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife, ensuring that the pharaoh's legacy would endure long after their death. The pharaoh's legacy in the afterlife. Art for eternity. The pharaoh's art was not solely for earthly recognition. It was designed to ensure that the pharaoh's legacy continued in the afterlife. The tomb paintings, statues, and inscriptions in the burial chambers were not just representations of the pharaoh's life, they were tools to guarantee the pharaoh's immortality. The art depicted the pharaoh's journey through the underworld and their eventual resurrection as a god, allowing the pharaoh to continue ruling in the divine realm. By immortalizing the pharaoh's image in art, the ancient Egyptians ensured that the pharaoh's divine rule would never end. The depictions of the pharaoh were not just meant to be admired, they were considered a vital part of the spiritual and cosmic order. The pharaoh's connection to the gods was reinforced through the art, and the pharaoh's eternal presence was guaranteed by these images, which transcended death itself. Cultural influence. The pharaoh's legacy on Egyptian society. The pharaoh's influence on art was not just about their own image. It was also a way to shape the culture of Egypt. Through the art they commissioned and the monuments they built, the pharaohs left an indelible mark on Egyptian society. The grandeur of the pyramids, temples, and statues became symbols of Egypt's power and cultural identity. The art created during a pharaoh's reign reflected not only their personal achievements, but also the collective spirit of the Egyptian people. The pharaoh's legacy in art continued to influence subsequent generations, even after the fall of the Egyptian Empire. The art of Egypt became a model for later civilizations, and the depictions of pharaohs, gods, and the Egyptian way of life would continue to be admired and studied by future cultures, ensuring that the pharaohs' cultural and artistic influence lasted for millennia